that if you change your thinking, you can actually improve the quality of your life? We'll tell you how on this edition of Talking with Henrietta, coming up next. Hi, I'm Henrietta. Welcome to the show. You've probably read a few books or seen YouTube videos that give you exercises that you can do to tone and improve your body. You've also even heard about how eating various foods can make you feel better and live longer. And what about those relationship experts that give advice on what you can do to have more fulfilling relationships? Well, on this show, my guests will tell us how by simply changing our thoughts and the way we look at things, we can improve our health, lengthen our life, and enhance our relationships, all by changing our thoughts. So let's talk about what we have to do. My guest is Lakiba Pittman. Ms. Pittman is an educator, business consultant, and creative artist with decades of leadership experience in corporate America and high tech. She is currently the director for the Office of Diversity and an adjunct professor at Notre Dame de Namur University, and she is an adjunct professor at Menlo College in Menlo Park. She is also certified by Stanford University's Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education to teach compassion cultivation training. And it's the compassion cultivation training, also known as CCT, that we will talk about today. So, welcome, Lakiba. It's a delight to have you.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yes. Now, given all the hype about all the things we can do to improve our lives, what's compassion cultivation training all about?
Well, it's based in a concept that on some innate level, we all have the ability to be compassionate. It's kind of a natural force that's within us to want to take care of or alleviate the suffering of an animal or a person. And so the thing that the course, the training does is to help sustain that and help cultivate that and remind you of that and to help you get it in more of a practice format. Because even though we have the ability to be compassionate, we're not always compassionate.
So, and one would think it wouldn't be practical to always be compassionate, or would it be? So what is, we have different ideas about what compassion is and what it isn't. How would you define it?
Well, I'm going to define it by defining something else first, and then I'll define that. So when we have empathy, say, for someone, it usually means that it's an inner feeling that we have where I feel for you, I connect with what's going on with you. And in being empathetic, it can be a positive thing or it could be a struggling thing. Like if you really got really good news right now and you started jumping up and down and celebrating, I could empathize with that. I could feel that same thing because I've also had good things happen in my life. So it's like I'm feeling I have the ability to feel what you're feeling.
Is that putting yourself in somebody else's place?
Yes, it is. Okay. It's often seen as putting myself in your shoes.
Now, what about sympathy?
Sympathy is a little bit more detached, meaning when you sympathize with someone, you haven't necessarily gone through that same thing. right? But you can see that something's happening. It's more external, if you will. So an example would be, let's say I've never been to a funeral, or no one in my family has passed away, and someone in your
Ah,
family has passed away, and I see you sad. So I sympathize with you, even though I've never had that experience. So it's the ability to kind of recognize that something is happening to you.
that
I
might be hurtful
that
or
might be hurtful or
painful.
painful, and I sympathize with it. But in order for that to get to empathize, I would need to be able to project
And feel
myself
it.
into that
And
situation.
pity?
Pity is usually a casting down view where I'm a bit at a higher level and I'm looking down at
Oh, you
you.
poor dears.
Yes, exactly. That would be
You
more
deserve
something.
what you get. I mean, you
Exactly.
could say it that way.
Exactly. That's more of a pitying aspect. And so compassion is recognizing the suffering of someone. So compassion involves a recognition that someone is suffering in some way. And within you, there is the desire to alleviate the suffering.
So, why is it important, compassion, wanting to alleviate somebody's suffering, important
Mhm.
to our well being?
Well, it's not only important to our well being, it's important to our planet, right? And to, if we care about, if we want to survive and we want to be able
That's
to care about the
yes,
people
that's
on the
looking
planet.
at it in a broad sense.
Yes,
But just bringing it down
personally,
to an individual to
right,
say,
right,
this is why it might be in your interest, beneficial for
right.
you.
So being compassionate has external benefits, meaning if I see you suffering and I aid you, so I've helped you. And in helping you, it also creates the endorphins in my body light up. The parts of my brain that are sending calm signals and positive attributes throughout my body are sensitized.
It's like maybe a runner's high.
Very
After
much
you
so. Very
exercise,
much
that
so.
feeling
Very
of
much so. So
power
in a
or
sense,
wholeness.
before I took the training, I didn't know the science behind all of the good things I like to do. I don't even think I had consciously thought, I'm doing this to help this person so it will make me feel better. I never consciously thought of it in that way. It wasn't really until actually I went through the training that they produced so much evidence of what goes on in the physical body and what goes on in the brain.
So how did this training come about? What's the background of compassion cultivation training?
Well, it was founded by Dr. Doty, James Doty, who's at Stanford University School of Medicine. And he was plagued by this thought and notion of trying to figure out how could there be so much suffering in the world, and how were people not cultivating their compassion? Why was there so much suffering? Why weren't people who had means to help other people? What was it that was going on that people that had the ability to help others were not? So he started off kind of asking that question.
And not answering, I guess what we have heard,
Mhm.
I guess growing up is, well, it's a part of life. the
struggle,
suffering.
the suffering and the struggle.
Yes, and it's
well,
a
yes,
part
it
of
is.
being human.
Yes, it is.
And maybe
yes.
it's because of our separation from God that
Potentially.
you know,
Right.
those are some of the answers from a religious point of
Yes.
view,
Yes.
or why it is that
Yes.
man is born to
Yes.
suffer, to die.
Right. So it's not that we don't recognize that everybody suffers, because that's somewhat of an equalizer as well, knowing that we all suffer.
Do we?
Well, I don't know anyone that doesn't suffer. I haven't met that person
Regardless of
yet.
income.
Regardless of income, because there's different types of suffering.
Yes, people
Right.
are human beings, and you can't
Yeah.
escape the human condition.
Right. And I think he was just coming from that place of the world needing more love, needing more care, needing more compassion. Like, we're living in the midst of great wealth, but also great suffering. And so he was kind of driven by this quandary of what's really going on there. That's where it started from. And because he's a scientist, he wasn't really looking at it in a religious way or even a spiritual way per se. So he brought together scientists to try to look at what's really going on in the psyche and the biology of a person. What is this thing that's going on that some people do and some people don't? And he also wanted to look at, are there any signs within the physical body that indicate whether or not we are prone to being empathetic or not? So it started off really as kind of a scientific study of the efficacy of compassion and thinking good thoughts about people. And in that quest, when he brought together all of the scientists, eventually he sought an audience with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. He ended up meeting him and then meeting Jimpa, who is his primary translator. And to shorten that up just a bit, the Dalai Lama made his first donation outside of Tibetan culture to the development of Stanford's Center for Compassion.
So
and
you
altruism.
mentioned Thumpton Jimpa,
Yes,
who was the Dalai Lama's translator.
right.
And he went on to make achievements in contributions in this field himself.
That's correct. As a matter of fact, he devoted 3 years of his life. He came to Stanford from, I believe he was in Canada at the time, 1 week a month for 3 years to develop the curriculum that became the curriculum.
Okay, now go on.
For compassion cultivation training.
So before we talk about that curriculum, we have an excerpt from a presentation that Jimpa gave to Google that we can see, where he talks about what compassion is. So if we can see that now, we're ready.
So I think there are all these very, very cool findings coming from science that are increasingly showing that actually compassion is part of our natural instinct. It's actually part of our natural makeup. And furthermore, there are more and more research findings showing that, in fact, compassion is good for us. You know, His Holiness often says that many people feel that when they listen to compassion and they think about compassion and they think about kindness, many people feel that to do compassion and to act out of compassion is good for someone else, the recipient, and not necessarily good for themselves. But he says that actually the first beneficiary of your experience of compassion is you yourself, because your compassionate act actually brings about a material benefit to the other is dependent on many factors, including receptivity on the part of the recipient, their state of mind, And sometimes you may have the best intention, but what you do may not be the right thing to do in the right situation. But when you feel compassion and reach out to someone, at that moment you yourself have gained the benefit of experiencing compassion. And in fact, in my book, I talk quite a bit about this, and I refer to compassion as the best kept secret of happiness. And that's one of the paradoxes of compassion as well as happiness, because when we think about compassion, we, in a common sense or intuitive kind of sense, would say, okay, yes, when we feel compassion, we are opening our heart, we are making room in our heart for someone else's problem and situation. It's a good thing to do, but it's not necessarily a way to joy, because one would in fact expect additional misery because you are taking on more problem than you yourself have. But it turns out it's the exact opposite. When we experience compassion, and studies have shown that people who act out of kindness, in fact the psychologists refer to it as the helper's high. There's a chemical in the brain that are associated with the feeling euphoria gets activated. And so that's sort of an interesting paradox, because one would expect more misery and distress when you act out of compassion, but exact the opposite happens. But if you think about it, it's not really that much of a paradox, because one of the things about the experience of compassion and feeling of compassion is at that moment, you feel deeply connected with someone in front of you. And that powerful sense of connection is very important part of human aspiration and human need. We are social creatures, and our happiness and our suffering, it really is determined by the quality of relationships that we have with others. There might be few, hermits, maybe 1 in a billion, who will be able to be in a total state of joy, alone, without needing that interaction with a fellow human at the level of heart connection. But that might be 1 in a billion. But for most of us, our experience of joy and our experience of suffering and pain really comes from the quality of relationship that we have with important people in our life, colleagues at work, and other people that we have to interact on a daily basis. So when you experience compassion, you really feel connected to someone. And in that state, basically, one of the important things that happens is that you learn to forget yourself. And it's this letting go of your sense of self or self-awareness that really opens the space for joy. So now take a step back and think about all the times when you felt most happy. I bet the common denominator is that ability to forget yourself. That's the paradox of happiness. So if you really want a true joy, you have to let go of your own self-consciousness. And there is nothing more powerful than the experience of compassion.
Well, that's fascinating.
It was.
And I thought, as he talked, I thought of certain things.
Okay.
For example, the giving that a mother does to an infant.
Yes.
I mean, now that's a giving of yourself very completely,
That's true.
where that child becomes most important.
That's right.
I also thought of the Good Samaritan. You know,
Yes.
that biblical
Yes.
parable
Yes.
of the man who was passing
road.
on,
Yes.
on the road, and
Yeah.
saw this other man that other people had passed by.
Right.
So, if compassion
Mm-hmm.
is a way to joy and happiness, and it's something that's innate,
Mm-hmm.
how is it that people don't recognize when they're giving and when they're compassionate that they may have these overwhelming good feelings such that they would be more compassionate more often?
And so are you asking why aren't people more compassionate
Yes,
more often?
yes. If it
Yeah.
stimulates
Yeah.
a high,
Yeah.
then one would
Why
think,
isn't everybody trying to get high on compassion?
yes,
Yeah.
yes, and giving.
Right. I mean, I think it's a great question, and it's kind of the riddle of the times. I personally think that, from my own life, that things can get in the way, meaning when I'm in fear, when I'm doubting myself, when I'm angry, when I feel offended, all of those types of things, they tend to block my tendency to be compassionate.
Well, I'm thinking also there's
Mhm.
something called survival.
True.
One's
Yeah,
sense of
yeah.
survival.
And I'm glad you said one's sense of survival, because sometimes it's a false notion, meaning sometimes we're afraid of another person, or and it isn't really true, but we're feeling some fear about that person.
So we've all heard how you should follow your intuition.
Yeah.
And if you're feeling fear, maybe
Mhm.
there is a reason that you should be feeling fear.
And
And
yeah,
that's not a time
right,
to
right.
be feeling compassion, is it?
Well, first of all, I didn't give the full definition of compassion. So first,
Ah.
just going back just a little bit, compassion is noticing the suffering and feeling the desire to alleviate the suffering, but you may not actually go do something. So it can involve an action, or it may not be an action. So for example, if I am walking down the street and I see something going down, and maybe somebody's accosting somebody or something, and say initially I feel the desire to alleviate the suffering of the person that's being beat down. But say my alarm is going, my intuition, my own, on a visceral level, on some level, I feel that I have to protect myself. Then am I still feeling compassion even though I don't go over there? Yes. So compassion isn't necessarily an outward action.
So you're saying it's not something that one needs to act on
Not always.
all the time.
Not by definition. Not by definition. Meaning you can have a compassionate thought, a desire to alleviate the suffering of someone, but you may not actually go do something.
Would those thoughts of compassion lead you, they could lead you afterwards
Absolutely.
to take action?
Yes, and so some people do take action, and some people just feel. For example, you hear the notion of someone praying for someone, or someone witnessing someone suffering, or someone sending someone positive vibes, right? So is that compassion? It could be, right?
And I'm thinking there might be the guilt that lives with a person when action isn't taken.
Sometimes. And so we try to, in the training, we unpack that, because we're not trying to make anybody feel guilty, right, for not taking action. And that's why it's important to get that. It would be nice if people were able to take action, but to have a compassionate thought doesn't necessarily mean that you went and actually did something physically.
Now, we heard Jimpa in the video say how compassionate is something that's innate. It's something
Yes.
that we're born with, and
Yes.
yet there's the paradox. And I've
Definitely.
seen studies that the more wealth you have, the less compassion
Right.
you feel for those who don't have.
Right. Right. I mean, I'm in the same place as you. When I hear him say that, I can think of all these examples where that's not, where I don't see the evidence of it being innate. However, let me say that Now, this is kind of a striking example, but an example nonetheless. So when you look at the pictures of lynchings of African Americans, there are African American people, there are Black people, they're looking, so they're traumatized by seeing it happen. But then you usually in those pictures see all of the white people that are also there, right, witnessing the lynching. So is the innate nature of compassion coming forth in all of the people that are represented there? If it is innate, then how can someone watch the suffering of another without wanting to alleviate it in some way?
And how can a soldier in warfare
Exactly.
inflict suffering
Exactly.
to an enormous degree on people,
Right,
like with
right.
My Lai
Yes.
in the Vietnam War,
Right.
shooting women, children,
Yes.
older people.
Yeah. So it's a tough dilemma, and now we're kind of getting into cognitive dissonance. So in order to hurt the person, you have to not see them as a person. So now we're kind of getting on a deeper level of it, but if you don't view someone as being human, then you're able to justify the action, at least in the moment.
Do you know, and that's true, you're trained to act in other ways.
Right.
However, compassion doesn't just extend to human beings.
No,
of course,
not at
you
all.
dehumanize people.
Right.
And it's easier.
Yeah.
But even if you think people are animals,
Yeah.
there are people who are very compassionate in terms of animals. That
Well, they
animals
are.
have rights
That's
too.
true. That's
so
true.
one doesn't have to be a
Yeah.
human being
That's
to
true.
bring
Absolutely
out compassion.
True. Well, as a matter of fact, in the training, we start off with a conversation around who you naturally have compassion for. And so we consider that many people have compassion for their pets. So they're included in the conversation. When we're just talking in general about who and under what circumstances do we have a natural sense of compassion. So some people can have compassion for their animal, but not for certain people, right? So that's something to be looked at.
Well, I would almost think, okay, so let's talk about who is it easier or easiest to have compassion for. So you can say, well, then there are family members.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, you have families where people aren't compassionate.
Right.
I mean, all the domestic violence.
That's right.
There's no evidence of compassion there.
That's true. So in order to help cultivate compassion, we start with where you are. So we start with where you are. So in the training, we ask you to think of who do you naturally have compassion for? And then we try to build onto that, right? So we start with where you are, and then a little bit we try to stretch you or challenge you to consider having compassion for those you haven't been having compassion for.
That's a stretch.
That is a stretch.
Why?
Well, because we're trying to, there's some resistance to having compassion for people who maybe have hurt us, who are in some category that we don't appreciate. Some people don't have compassion for attorneys or political people.
Or bosses.
Or bosses.
Yes. So what's the purpose of having compassion for people who are hurtful?
Well, we want you to develop an understanding of what it might be, and we'll actually throw that back on you.
Why?
What could be a benefit?
Yes.
So I'm asking you,
what
could be a benefit, right? Because it's something that we have to discover together. So we would talk that out. I mean, I could say what it would be for me personally, but what might it be for you? if you were
Well,
able
do you
to.
know,
Mhm.
I'm thinking, since you did ask the question, forgive me for having interrupted just
No, that's
then,
okay.
but when somebody has been hurtful, there is a certain pain
That's
that you
true.
feel.
That's true.
And when somebody has been hurtful, there's a certain victimness
That's right.
that you feel.
That's right.
And there's also maybe a sense of powerlessness
Right.
that you
Right.
feel.
So
And so
eventually,
I'm
yeah.
thinking this is a way
Yes.
of letting go of that pain, of that feeling of being hurt, and maybe taking back one's power.
That's absolutely true.
It's something you have to
Yeah.
really work at
You
to
do.
know
You
that
do.
to know that overcoming this feeling of pain
Yes.
is something that might be beneficial to me.
Absolutely. And forgiveness is a great part of the program, right? That's an aspect of it. And also this notion of recognizing that you don't know the full story of that person, right? The person that hurt you has their own hurt story. We each kind of have our own pain story, right? And so if
But
we
is
could,
that an excuse?
no, not an excuse for harming, but we want to understand on a level that person is just like me.
But maybe they aren't. How do we know?
On the deepest level, right? So here's what we're doing. We're making a presumption, say this is how we show up, and then we keep going deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, right? So when we get, say, to here, let's say we're on a human level, right? And then all these levels are all the ways that we're different. So these are all the ways of diversity and difference. Then we keep going down, and there's a layer where we're all human. We all want to be loved. We all want to be considered. We all want to be seen. And then there's a lowered level, that's a spiritual level, where we're all energy.
So we
Right.
can understand all of that theoretically.
That's true.
But if you have to constantly interact with that person,
Mm-hmm.
and that person hasn't changed, you know,
Yeah.
it's said that
Yeah.
the person we need to change is ourselves.
That's right. That's
But
right.
how does that assist the relationship? I know your
Yeah.
pain.
Yes.
You know, it's like a woman who's a victim of domestic violence
Yeah.
can say, I know his pain, I know what he's gone
Right.
through,
Right.
but he's still hitting me, he's still inflicting pain on me.
So you have to get out first.
So,
right. Yeah.
this compassion, how does compassion work?
Well, compassion is kind of a releaser in a sense, meaning if you're constantly focused on the perpetrator, then you're not really living the fullness of your life. And when you go through compassion cultivation training, we're not really even saying be compassionate to all people at all times for the rest of your life. It's a consideration of this nature. What we're saying is an innate nature for you to be kind and to be compassionate. And maybe it isn't, right? Maybe some people feel that our innate nature is not. So it isn't condoning. Let's go there. It's not condoning bad behavior. It's not saying, even if you understand this person's story, that then I'm going to have compassion for it, because what it's doing is it's offering you evidence of what it can do for you, and it's offering you the opportunity to make it more alive and relevant in your own life as you're able to apply it.
I would assume it's a way of saying it allows you to free up your energies.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
that instead of being tied to
Right.
thinking of the worst,
Yeah.
you can focus your energies on thinking of options in your life.
Right.
That person hasn't won.
Exactly.
You're the power
Exactly.
over you.
Right.
So you still have the power.
You still have the power, and certainly you want to develop the ability to release and let go.
Now,
Right?
let's talk about that power. It's not power over another human being.
No, it's your own power in your own life to always kind of release what you don't need or isn't serving you.
Oh, so
Yeah.
you know, the compassion, I look at it in two ways, and this
Okay.
is what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
It allows you the ability to go out and extend yourself for someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, it allows you the ability to release all of those harmful
That's
emotions
correct.
that might be holding you back.
That's right. That's right. Well said. It is a process.
Oh, yes, that one has to work on, I would think,
Exactly.
every day to constantly
Yes.
remind. I guess what you have to do is establish a goal.
That's
That
true.
this is who I want to be in
That's
the
true.
world, and this is
Yeah.
the way I want to react.
Right. And in the course, right? I mean, you don't have to go through the training to get this. Hopefully, the people that are listening are getting something out of just this conversation. But whatever we're doing where we're trying to become a better version of ourselves, we have to practice it, right? Because we fall back. We all
Oh,
fall
yes,
back, right?
yes.
So this is a practice, right? This is a practice we're going to do for the rest of our lives. We're going to be cultivating these redeeming qualities about ourselves that miraculously heal us as we are also trying to potentially heal others.
So the question, and I won't have you answer it now,
Okay.
but before our conversation ends,
Okay.
is the end result. If there is an end result, because there's practice constantly, and how do we know we've achieved what this goal of compassion would bring us to?
Okay.
But I said you don't have to answer that
Okay.
now. Let's
Okay.
talk more about
Okay.
the training,
Okay.
what it consists of.
All right. Well, it's an 8-week course in its traditional sense, although many of the practitioners, and I think there maybe about over 100 of us that are certified, many in the United States, but some in other countries. And so the traditional course is an 8-week course, 2 hours once a week. Now, all of us have done other versions of it, workshops, a day workshop, or 4 weeks. We've done modifications, but the traditional course is an 8-week course. We meet for 2 hours in the evening or on a weekend. Each week we cover a different dimension of compassion. As I said, we'll start off with a conversation about who you naturally have compassion for, defining compassion, and also tied to one of the things that you said, finding out why you're taking the class. Like, why, what about compassion cultivation training? What about it made you want to actually sign up for the class? So what are you hoping for? What are you looking for?
Yes, and I would think before you take a class like that,
Yeah.
there would have to be a reason for you to take it.
Normally, yeah.
Which means maybe one finds a deficiency in oneself or
Sometimes,
something
yeah.
that one wants to work on.
Right. It's, I mean, I've had,
I mean, I
it's
would think there
different.
has to be something specific that would draw
Yeah.
you to.
I mean, it's a variety of things. For some people, it's very specific. Like somebody will say, I'm really compassionate at work, but when I come home, my spouse says I could be more compassionate. So somebody's trying to, has been told they're not so compassionate, so they want to cultivate compassion. Some people have had challenges with self-compassion and self-care. They are very outward, compassionate oriented, and but they are lacking a bit
So,
in self-compassion.
for example, too hard on themselves?
Too hard on themselves, bad talk about
Pushing
themselves,
themselves, what, like
pushing, yeah,
you're no good or you
yeah,
can't do something
negative
or
self-talk, never really celebrating um, their accomplishments and what they do. So some people come in around that.
well, I
Yeah.
can imagine, and as you talk, I'm thinking someone would say, first of all, I would say to you, how does one necessarily pick compassion? I mean, there's so many other attributes
Oh,
in
absolutely.
our human existence
Yeah.
that one could pick. But
Yes.
then at the same time, I'm thinking somebody might say, oh, just man up. Just, what little
Yes.
boys are told,
Yes.
don't
Yes.
cry, be,
Yes.
be
Yes.
bigger, be tougher, be
Yes.
stronger.
Yes.
And that's the way you're going to get through the world. And this
Mm-hmm.
compassion is
Mm-hmm.
sissy stuff.
Well, that comes up in classes even at some point. Even the people that come may end up saying that. It's like,
Kumbaya or
yeah,
something like that.
exactly, exactly. Well, there are certainly people that feel that way, and if they feel that way strongly, they may not sign up for the class. But some people sign up for the class and still have aspects of that, right? So that's good to have people in the class for a variety of reasons, because then we can kind of learn from everyone. Some of the people are wounded, traumatized, and just trying to um,
Life is traumatizing.
yes, it is. So generate just more, what does this compassion mean? Also, a big part of the class is meditation and mindfulness, being present to what's going on. So some people who have never meditated are attracted because they want to learn how to meditate.
So for those who may not know,
Mhm.
what's meditation? And why
Yeah.
is that important?
Well, meditation can be defined in many ways, but for our purposes in this training, meditation is a centering in, it's a relaxing, it's kind of slowing everything down and letting go of what's called the monkey mind and all the thoughts that are going on. It's a way to relax and center and let go. And it's almost like sitting by a stream. If you can imagine that, we can think of settings in nature where we have some experiences of the meditative state.
And I would think maybe connecting with a power that's beyond us,
Exactly.
where
So
we can
once you start
feel a
meditating, you
flow
do. That's
or
right.
feel a part of
Yes,
all that is, where there's no separation.
that's correct. Now that's a meditator talking right there. So you must be a meditator.
Yes.
Right. So once you get into it, you start to tap into these benefits, right? This at one feeling. And that's kind of hard to define to a person that's never meditated. So we start off at the basic, at just breathing and closing your eyes, right? For a few minutes. So we're teaching you aspects of how to relax the body, how to slow your breathing, how to just be comfortable sitting with your eyes closed. We start pretty simply, but then for homework, you have meditation practices that you do in between each class.
All of this seems
Mhm.
kind of amorphous in the
Okay.
sense
Mhm.
that it's nothing you can touch, you can taste. It doesn't feel concrete,
Mhm.
that it's based on feelings. How
You
do
mean in
I,
terms of the experiential aspect of
yes,
it
how
for the
do I
person?
feel about this or about that, or what
Mhm.
do I think of it? Or so how
Yeah.
does, and you talk about this training being something that scientists
Right.
and philosophers
Yes.
or
Yes.
professors all came together
Yes.
to create.
So that's another part of the training. So part of the training is experiential. Part of the training is connecting with the other people in the class. Like we create a safe space. And there's some dyads, meaning we break up into groups and have different conversations about compassion, how easy it is, how hard was the meditation from last week, did I practice? So there's connection that occurs in the class, and a part of the class is also the sharing of the research data.
So I would think the ideal class would be people who either don't know each other
Mm-hmm.
or those who get along very well with each other.
Mm-hmm.
But it might not work with people who don't like each other. Since
Well,
there
I'd
has
love
to
to
be,
do it with a group that
since
doesn't like one
th-
another.
there is a
Yeah.
sharing that has to be done. I
Well,
would
that's
think,
true.
and a trusting
Yes,
that because you're unveiling vulnerabilities.
that's true. And as the facilitator, that's my opportunity. That's my gift to create the space and the opportunity for that to happen, even when people are coming together that might be having conflict. I've actually been invited to do not the 8 weeks, but a session with teams that are in conflict. Like I've gone in for 2 hours, I've gone in for an hour, I've gone in for 4 hours. So there's a way to adapt what I do for different settings. But going back to what you said, I've had classes where nobody knew anybody else in the class, and that class was great
I would think so.
because people connected.
Yeah, they didn't know anything
And they
about
didn't know anything
They couldn't
about-
hold anything
Right,
about
right.
anybody.
And I've done sessions for work groups where they all do work together. So I'm not aware if anybody's in conflict because I'm being brought in to do an intact group, right? So it's slightly different, right? It's slightly different, and people are not forced to share, right? So I kind of adapt it for the group that I'm working with.
Now, in doing a little background reading in terms of the training and
Okay.
the idea of compassion,
Okay.
that compassion can be gained by those who allow themselves to be vulnerable,
Yes.
who are sharing a
yeah.
part of themselves.
Yeah.
So why is the sharing so important? Because, as I said before, you're sharing yourself with
That's
somebody.
true. That's true.
And most people, you know, go around in the world
Without
hiding
sharing. Yes.
who they really are
it's-
for fear
yeah.
that once somebody
Sees
lets
it, yeah.
other people know
Yes.
what's inside,
Yes.
that
yes.
they're more easily hurt.
Well, you're naming something that's real, right? You're naming something that's real. I've had classes where certain people in the class are very talkative. We always have the ones that have something to say on every topic. And then you'll have the ones that never say anything. That just kind of rarely say anything. But here's what I noticed. I noticed that the ones that rarely say anything eventually connect, right? Maybe by class 4 or 5, or if it's an 8-hour day, by the half of a day, something starts to let go. Something starts to, I've never had anybody go the whole time just, holding themselves
So,
in.
for
Never.
those people who come in
Mhm.
and say, this is sissy stuff,
Yeah.
do they last the course?
Well,
And
go
if
ahead.
so, at the end of it,
Mhm.
has it made any difference?
To them, you mean? Or to the class?
In what they've expressed?
I personally have never had anyone say this is sissy stuff, or even not see a benefit in it in some way or another. I haven't had that person yet, but that may be because in the first couple of classes, in the first class, you're making clear where we're going. So you give them the GPS. You say, we're going to go down here, we're going to turn right, then we're going into this. Yes, I do.
You do that.
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I tell you where, I give you a sense of where we're going, right? And I tell you who I am and who I am not.
Now,
yeah,
in the sense of where we're going,
yes,
there is the why we're going there, and assuming that there is a destination. You know, we always hear it's not the destination, it's the journey.
Right.
What's the end result?
The end result is that you have identified or reacquainted yourself with a part of yourself that if you actualize it, if you nurture it, if you cultivate it, it can help you be more compassionate to others, and it can help enliven your own life. The end goal is that you learn, you remember yourself, that you tap back into qualities that are really in you, but maybe they got stunted along the way, maybe you got hurt along the way.
That's interesting that you remember yourself, because that assumes that there was a self-knowing someplace along the line.
That's a very good point, because Jempa keys right in on that, that there needs to be kind of this self-knowing, this ability to know who you are at some essence level, in order for you to kind of tap fully in.
So what does that mean? Because we're all changing constantly.
That's true.
We're all growing.
That's true.
One way or the other.
Right.
So
well, yeah.
What is this essence?
Well, I have my own interpretation of
and
that.
I guess that's what one gets in meditation, and a feeling of essence.
That's true.
But
yeah,
what is this essence that you can talk about, that we're supposed to know about ourselves?
Well, it's hard to define. I think artists and poets try to articulate it with language. Sometimes it's a feeling that is a little bit beyond language, but I sense it. I have come to know it, like in my meditations, and in a sense I have developed a memory of the pathway to get to it.
So I am thinking it could very well be, you know, there are people who might say, oh, I feel lost. And so maybe this is a way, as I'm just putting into my words what I'm getting, a way that one can connect with who one really is, and maybe what one's purpose is, and maybe what one's life should be about, or what one should be doing in one's life.
Well, that's a lofty goal, and it's a goal of mine, to not only help myself do that, but to help other people reconnect or connect with that knowing, that aspect of ourselves that I feel is there, you know, in my own
yes,
experience
where one can feel
life.
that one's life is purposeful.
Yeah.
I would think if it gives you nothing else, if it gives a person nothing else, just the feeling of, why am I here? What am I doing? Am I doing what I should be doing, or what I could be doing?
Right.
Am I fulfilling myself as a human being?
Yes.
And what can I do if it is a part of my fulfillment?
Yeah.
To help others fulfill themselves.
Right. It's almost like, what is your highest vision of yourself? And have you ever even thought about that? Like, what is my highest vision of myself? And maybe you don't exactly know, but do you at least feel some sense that you're moving in that direction?
So I find to connect it with compassion, that this is a road. And I find it, as I said,
a pathway.
Yes.
Yeah.
Why compassion? Yes.
Yes.
Oh, it's because James Doty,
Yeah.
Dottie,
Yeah. Doty.
Doty,
Yeah.
sensed that there was something missing,
Yes. Yes.
and it was compassion.
Yeah, he had that question, that curiosity, like what's going on here? Yeah.
And if we all felt more compassion,
hmm
then we wouldn't hurt each other.
we can heal the world.
If we all could do
Yeah.
that.
Right. Right.
Now, that does seem to be a very lofty goal.
Doesn't it? Right? So maybe we can't do it on a massive scale, but maybe I can connect to you. Maybe I
Well,
can do one by one.
that's what I've heard, like the 100th monkey. If you
Yeah,
can get
yeah.
enough people,
Right.
at least it starts with us.
Right. And just think of what would a compassionate community be? What does if a community is defined as a compassionate community?
But
What would it look like?
people are afraid that the more compassionate you show,
You'll
you
be taken advantage of, or
you take away people's incentive.
many people
help
do feel like that.
themselves.
Yeah, so that's a good discussion point for our training classes, right? We talk those kinds of things out.
So, how do you want to leave us? What do you want
Well,
to say in the minute that we have left?
Okay, I just want to encourage people to consider the concept or the construct or the thought of compassion. It is a heart-centered construct, if you will. It engages some of your feelings, but it may just mean sitting with someone. It can be a quiet passion. It can be a quiet revolution. You know, it doesn't have to be lofty. You don't have to be out on the streets feeding the homeless, although you could do that. But it can be very subtle and very personal.
Well, it seems at the very least, it can be a new way of thinking
That's true.
that we can use to find who we are,
Yeah.
tap into who we are, and assist others in the process. So thank
That's true.
you.
Thank you so much.
It's been something of a joy.
Okay, great. Yay.
Having this discussion.
Okay, thank you so much.
And
for
I hope
inviting
our
me.
viewers feel that way too. So thank you for joining us. Until next time.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's
That was a good one.